All right, so we're getting ready to start to measure our tunnel that needs to be cut out. It's kind of hard to see being underneath the car, but I'll do the best I can here so you can see what I'm about to do. First, we just want to kind of measure the drive shaft. It's 3-inch. Want to give ourselves a little bit of room on each end, but you don't want to cut too big to start with because then you have a lot more patch panels to put back. So you want to kind of keep it small to start with because you can always open it up later if you need to. So being 3-inch starting shaft, we'll probably go, probably give ourselves, like, to start off with, I would say, maybe we'll just roughly go with about 1 inch past the drive shaft. Okay. So about 1 inch, three quarters to 1 inch, whatever you want to do, as long as you just give yourself a little bit of room. Doesn't really matter. I'm doing 3/4 right here. Also, using these paint pens when you're marking on this crappy undercoated stuff helps a lot because the mark will stay there and you can actually see it. So they're kind of nice to use. So anyway, so I kind of got a little bit of a mark here, just where I'm going to go to. Let's see if you can see in there. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark it all the way down. And once I get my marks all the way set, then I'll make a couple cuts into the floor along this as I go. Cutoff wheel. I won't cut the whole thing all the way through here. I'll just make some cuts so that way whenever I go up inside the car, I can see where my cuts are. This car also has a whole bunch of Dynamat in there, so you have to cut and peel that away too, which is kind of a pain, but normally you won't have that. But what helps is that if you make your cuts and bottom down here, just to be able to see through into the car, when you get up on the top there, you can really lay it out good and make better measurements than under here where there's not a lot of stuff to go by. And then you can lay it out better. And then when you trim it out, you have a lot cleaner work area when you go to put it back together. You don't have to, do 50 different, bends and pieces. You can make one nice cut out here and trim it up to make it to where it's easier to put back together. Because you want it to look nice. A lot of people say it's underneath the bottom of the car. Who cares what it looks like? Well, I care what it looks like. It should be the same quality underneath as it is on top, as far as I'm concerned. You should have the same thing. Somebody's going to put it up in the air to do the exhaust. They're going to look at your work. Somebody's going to put it up in the air someday to do an alignment or maybe some other work on the car, and they're going to see the work that you do. And, you want it to be nice. So you take pride in what you do. So it's very important. So I'll make some marks here. These paint pens, you can just literally push them up in the air as you go and just make little dots. So just kind of give you some reference points to go off of. So when you pull your measurements, you know that you're not too close to the drive shaft to start with. And this is all the way to the back. So here's something you can see here. This big mount right here, right there, that was where the actual third member snubber mounted to that. So that way the rear end didn't hit the floor on these cars. Had a rubber mount there that bolts on. And obviously you take that out and that whole thing's going to get cut out around there. So this will actually get opened up a little bit wider right here for the third member area. This will get wider right here. So once we cut this out, we'll go on the outsides of these. So, and we'll taper this into that. So we'll come out to it. Like I said, we can always change that later. Once we start our cuts, we can see what looks the best and what gives us the best look and functionality. So back here, I don't cut a whole ton out. I mean, right off the bat, even though this is all cut for the notch and everything to go across and all the tubes that are going to go across for the panhard bar and stuff, I cut out the minimal amount to start with, and then you can always open it up later. Like I said, don't be scared to cut twice. People say measure 2 times, cut once. Yeah, that's true. But in this, you want to cut it out small, and then you can open it back up, so that way you have the minimal amount of work. You don't want a ginormous drive shaft tunnel in here where your seat doesn't fit back in or takes up more space, over where your floor is if you don't need to. So start minimal and work your way out as you go. All right, so I got a few marks on there. So let me go get a measuring tape here and measure out this guy for me and see where I can go. All right, I'm just gonna go from the frame section out. That'll give me a, actually there's a seam in the body right here. So always try to go to a point that's a fixed point on the car. Something that you know is gonna be the same on both sides. And then when you measure it, check both sides just to make sure they are the same. Give you a good reference point. So with this one here, I'm thinking I can go to 20.5 inches right there. 20.5 inches, that's really close to the marks that I just made on there. So that way I'm in the general area, but this way I can, when I make my cuts, when I go inside, I know that I'm right where I need to be. Mark, double check it, make sure it's straight. 20.5. It's kind of hard to see up in there, but you can kind of see where our mark is right there. Do the same on the other side, anything different. See if there's a seam over there, which fits exact same seam on both sides. That's where they put the car together. So let's go over the drive shaft. It's a lot easier to go off of a fixed location than like a curved area. I always try to go off something straight. That way you're, okay. So now this side is gonna be 19 inches. Okay, so the measurement is different from side to side. And the reason being is that this guy right here. So the pumpkins, the third member, whatever you want to call them, they're offset. Okay, so with it being offset, this is not dead center all the way down right there. It's offset on this. So you need to double check and make sure everything is good. So that way, whenever you're doing your measurements, you know what's going on there. I've already centered the rear axle. So the rear axle is actually centered in the car. So I know exactly that that is correct before I start with this. Always make sure your axle is centered where it needs to be before you do any kind of cutting in this car. Otherwise, if you set it off, it's going to be way off. So, and when you measure on these cars, a couple people have asked me in the past, like, well, you know, I made some measurements on my frame, but then it was close to the body. Yep, that happens sometimes. These cars maybe weren't put on exactly right, or trucks or whatever. So always measure the axle, frame to the axle, and then also find a spot like on your drum and go to your body just to reference, so you kind of got an idea of right where you are, so you know how much room you have. I've seen things off as far as ½ inch or even further, to where you measure the frame and the body is off that far and your tire hits on one side and not the other, because everything's centered underneath the car or the truck. So you need to make sure you double check all that stuff before you start going any further. That way you don't end up with a problem rubbing your tires or whatever. Okay, so our measurement ended up being a little bit different there. So now I can check to make sure they're the same on both sides. So I can adjust this one over a little bit, so that way it's the same as the other side. Perfect. Okay. All right, so that's kind of where we are right now to start with. Like I said, once I cut out the small amount, this is not your final cut, so you don't have to be, you know, so worried about it being so exact and precise right here, because this is going to be my minimal cut. And then when I go in, I'm going to decide where I want to cut it out a little bit more to, so that way when I make my new piece, I can make sure that the radius, or however I want to build it, kind of flows with the floor if possible. Or if I've been like a doghouse style, or if I want to do it rounded, I haven't decided yet. You can do them different ways. It doesn't really matter. It's just whatever your preference is. So I'm going to cut the minimal amount. I'll go in there, and once everything's sitting all the way up inside the car, then I'll make a decision on what I want to do at that point. But right now, I'm just going to get some cut marks on it, so that way I can get the car down and start to get inside to measure and line it all up. Okay, we're getting ready to start cutting on this drive shaft tunnel. And this stuff gets messy with all of this undercoating and crap on it. So a face shield is good to use on these things, so save your face. So we're just gonna find our mark and then make a cut. Where we at? Right here we go. Like I said, you don't have to cut a ton, just get your hole started up through there. You can kind of see right there. They're just reference points for right now. I'll go up into the front there. There's not a lot of room under here either, so. Let's go on the outside of this. I can't reach in there all the way up there, so let's do it from the inside. So basically what we've done is just made a couple reference marks. You can kind of see them. It's hard to see, but just a couple of reference cuts. So that when we get inside, we can measure it out good. You can see that one right there. And then go ahead and cut the whole thing out from the inside, and then we can lower the suspension down the rest of the way. That way we can get it to the height that we need, and we know exactly how far it sticks in. It doesn't stick in a ton all the way. It changes, variances change a little bit from the front to the back, but you know, whatever it takes. You want to have clearance when it sits down. You don't want it to be rubbing anywhere. Also, you probably noticed I have chains on here. I have nothing else holding the rear end. I have jack stands under the back, obviously, but once I take those jack stands out, I don't have anything else in there holding the rear end in place. So I put these chains the way, make sure that it holds everything in place so I can lift the car up and down, because there's no shocks or anything on it yet. That's another thing is a lot of people don't realize you don't want to do all the suspension work until all this is done. This is just set up right now. Once it's all cut, then you can go ahead and start to finish all the rear suspension. That's all we're doing right now, getting this tranny tunnel cut out, get the suspension down where it needs to go, and then finish all the rear suspension. That way, that's it all the way. You want all your suspension tacked in, all figured out before, and then literally I'll pull the rear end completely out of the car, and that way I can finish all the welding on the notch, all the rear end, all the front stuff, the tranny, the dry shaft tunnel, after I make my templates, and do all that with the rear end out so you have room, and that way you can do a nice clean job and makes it 10 times easier. Yeah, it's a lot of work to pull the rear end out and do all this stuff, but at the end of the day, being able to weld all this stuff, you know, where it's way up under here, it's hard to get to. You know, on the notch, I've welded all the sides in. Here you can see that. All the sides, the bottoms, tacked all the plates in, tacked all the inside plates in. Everything's tacked in, welded on the bottom 100%. And the sides are all welded 100%. So that way it's strong. But you want to make sure you can do all that welding good and get to it, because it's not like a truck where you can pull the bed off. So it's kind of a pain in the ass. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and get the car down, then we'll hop inside, start measuring it out. Check it out.